What if I told you that beneath the grand marble columns and golden domes that history remembers, there existed an entirely different Constantinople, one where ordinary people lived extraordinary lives that no chronicler ever bothered to record. Tonight, we're going to walk through shadows that time forgot, through market stalls where the real heart of the Byzantine Empire beat quietly, steadily. For over 1,000 years, close your eyes and let your mind drift back to the year 1025. The world was smaller then, yet somehow more intimate. In Constantinople, the greatest city between Rome and Baghdad, Emperor Basil II ruled an empire that stretched from the Danube to the deserts of Syria. But we're not here for emperors tonight. We're here for Maria, who sold bread by the city gates. For Andreas, whose weathered hands measured precious saffron grain by grain. For children whose names were never written down, but whose laughter once echoed through narrow alleys that archaeologists will never excavate. This is the boring history. Boring because it happened every day. Because it was ordinary. Because the people who lived it never imagined that someone centuries later might find their quiet struggles and small victories fascinating enough to remember. Yet perhaps that's exactly what makes their stories so compelling. To those of us seeking rest in our modern world of constant noise and endless urgency, the Byzantine Empire wasn't just golden mosaics and theological debates. It was the smell of fresh bread mixing with cardamom, the soft clink of bronze coins changing hands, the whispered negotiations between strangers who became neighbors through the simple act of buying and selling what they needed to survive another day. It was a world where time moved differently, not by the frantic tick of digital clocks, but by the rhythm of kneading dough, of measuring spices, of the sun's slow journey across market awnings. Tonight's journey requires no passport, no knowledge of ancient languages, no ability to decipher imperial chronologies. We're simply wandering. It's like sleepwalkers through a marketplace that exists now only in the space between memory and imagination. Here in streets whose names are forgotten, among people whose faces were never painted, we'll discover that the most profound truths about human nature aren't found in throne rooms or battlefields, but in the gentle exchanges between ordinary people trying to make ordinary lives a little more bearable, a little more beautiful. The market we're about to explore lived in the shadow of the great hippodrome, in the maze of streets that connected the imperial palace to the harbor where ships arrived daily with goods from the edges of the known world. It was never grand enough for official histories, never dramatic enough for epic poems. It was simply ... there. Day after day, year after year, century after century, providing the foundation upon which all the empire's grander pretensions ultimately rested. As we begin this stroll, let the weight of your day dissolve like morning mist. The deadlines, the notifications, the endless rush of modern life, none of that exists in the gentle world we're entering. Here, success is measured not in quarterly profits or social media metrics, but in having enough bread for tomorrow, enough oil for the lamp, enough kindness to share with a stranger who might become a friend. So breathe deeply and prepare to discover why sometimes the most boring stories are the ones that stay with us longest, echoing in our dreams like half-remembered lullabies from a childhood we never actually lived but somehow remember. The market stalls are waiting, patient as they have been for centuries, ready to whisper their secrets to anyone willing to walk slowly enough to hear them. But what drew people to this particular corner of Constantinople each morning? When the city was full of markets and the empire offered endless opportunities for trade, the answer begins to unfold as the first light of dawn creeps across the Golden Horn like spilled honey, painting the water in shades that have no names in any living language. In the distance, the great dome of Hagia Sophia catches the earliest rays, its cross winking once before settling into the gentle glow that will mark the beginning of another day in the greatest city of the Eastern world. But our attention drifts downward, away from the monumental and toward the intimate, to the narrow streets where Constantinople's forgotten citizens are stirring to life with the quiet determination of people who understand that survival is a daily achievement, never a permanent condition. The morning air carries secrets on its salt-tinged breeze, the distant sound of church bells marking matins, the soft scrape of wooden shutters being pushed open by invisible hands, the gentle splash of water being poured from clay pitchers into basins that have never known the luxury of running taps. Listen carefully, and you can hear the city's heartbeat beginning to quicken. In workshops tucked between residential buildings, bakers are already at work, their ovens glowing like dragons' mouths in the pre-dawn darkness. The warmth that emanates from these hidden fires will soon draw the first customers of the day, people who work with their hands and need hot bread to fuel bodies that will spend the next 12 hours transforming raw materials into the goods and services that keep civilization functioning. Through latticed windows, oil lamps flicker like earthbound stars as merchants count yesterday's coins and plan today's hopes. The mathematics of survival are elegantly simple here. Buy carefully, sell fairly, trust wisely, and pray that the day brings enough customers to keep the flame burning through another night. These are not the complex calculations of imperial taxation or international finance. These are the pure, essential arithmetic of families who live one successful transaction away from comfort and one failed day away from hunger. The sound of hooves on stone announces the morning's first cart, its wooden wheels creating a rhythm that will soon be joined by dozens of others in the percussion section of commerce's daily symphony. The donkey pulling this particular load has made this same journey perhaps 1,000 times, its master walking beside it with the unhurried gait of someone who has learned that the secret to surviving in a competitive world is consistency rather than speed, reliability rather than brilliance. A woman emerges from a doorway, carrying a basket woven from river reeds by hands that knew techniques passed down through generations of craftspeople. She pauses to adjust her dark blue headscarf, the color favored by Constantinople's working women because it hides stains and doesn't show wear as quickly as brighter hues. Her footsteps join those of others now, the soft patter of leather soles on stone, the occasional tap of a walking stick, the whispered conversations of neighbors, who transform the simple act of going to market into a social ritual that builds the invisible bonds holding communities together. The streets themselves seem to stretch and yawn in the growing light, shadows retreating into doorways and beneath overhanging second floors like creatures of darkness, seeking shelter from the advancing day. The walls built from honey-colored stone begin to glow with their own inner light, and here and there, wild cats emerge from their nighttime hiding places, padding silently along building edges with the dignity of creatures who know they are tolerated guests in this human world. As the light strengthens, the outline of the market quarter becomes visible in the distance, a cluster of canvas awnings and wooden posts that marks the beating heart of ordinary life in extraordinary times. Smoke begins to rise from cooking fires, and the first calls of vendors drift on the morning air, though they're still too distant to make out individual words. It's like watching a vast organism slowly come to life, cell by cell, heartbeat by heartbeat, animated by needs and hopes that haven't changed. Much in the centuries since humans first discovered that life becomes more bearable when we help each other meet our daily challenges. The anticipation building in these awakening streets is different from anything our modern world experiences. There's no frantic urgency here, no panic about being late or missing opportunities. Instead, there's the patient expectation of people who know that the day will unfold at its own organic pace, bringing its own small dramas and quiet satisfactions, its own mixture of disappointment and fulfillment that makes each 24-hour cycle a complete story in miniature. Young children begin to appear in doorways, some still rubbing sleep from their eyes, others already wide awake and eager to begin whatever adventures the day might offer. In a world without formal education for most families, the market serves as their primary classroom, where they'll learn mathematics through watching transactions, geography through examining goods from distant places, and social skills through observing the complex negotiations between people who must find ways to trust each other despite coming from different backgrounds and speaking different dialects. The morning light continues its patient transformation, revealing details that nighttime had hidden, patches on clothing that speak to careful stewardship of precious resources, tools worn smooth by years of use, but maintained with the reverence accorded to objects that make the difference between prosperity and poverty. Faces marked by hard work and occasional hardship, but also by the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing your place in the world and filling it with dignity. But what kind of people would be the first to arrive at the market? And what drove them from warm beds to cold morning air in pursuit of the day's first transactions? But what kind of people would be the first to arrive at the market? And what drove them from warm beds to cold morning air in pursuit of the day's first transactions? The answer reveals itself as we follow the strengthening light toward the outer edge of the market, where the earliest vendors have claimed their territories with the quiet persistence of urban ivy. Here, in the shadow of weathered stone archways built by emperors whose names appear only in dusty chronicles, the humblest merchants conduct their essential trade in the necessities that keep life itself possible. These are the people who rise before dawn, not from ambition, but from necessity, who understand that the early morning hours belong to those who serve the most basic human needs. They've learned that success in their trade depends less on dramatic gestures than on reliable presence being here, day after day, with the simple goods that transform survival from a desperate struggle into a manageable routine. Maria, the bread seller, has arranged her wooden table with the same care another woman might arrange flowers in a cathedral, because she understands intuitively that bread is both sustenance and sacrament, the foundation upon which all other meals are built. Her 20 dark loaves represent hours of work that began long before dawn: the mixing and kneading, the careful tending of fires, the precise timing that transforms simple flour and water into something approaching nourishment for both body and soul. This is not the white, fluffy bread that graced imperial tables, but the dense, dark bread of working people, made from barley mixed with wheat when times are good, barley alone when they're harder. Each loaf embodies a small gamble, the cost of flour against the hope of customers, today's labor against tomorrow's uncertainty. But Maria has been making this gamble for 15 years now, and her presence here each morning represents a kind of quiet victory over the forces that make life precarious for people who own little beyond their skills and their determination to use them. Beside her, old Demetrius spreads his feast of olives on a cloth that was once brilliant blue, but is faded to the color of distant mountains. His olives come from groves outside the city walls, where his brother tends trees that were ancient when Constantine first decided to build a new Rome on these hills beside the Bosphorus. Some are black and wrinkled like raisins, preserved in their own oil and salt that carries the taste of Mediterranean sunshine. Others gleam green and firm, fresh enough to still hold the essence of the trees that bore them. The rhythm of transaction here moves like a gentle dance, choreographed by mutual need and seasoned by years of repeated interaction. A customer approaches Demetrios' stall, a young woman whose calloused hands speak of long hours at a weaving loom, whose simple dress and careful way of counting coins tells its own story about the mathematics of modest means. She points to the black olives, and Demetrios measures out a portion into her clay bowl with movements that have become ritual through repetition. Their brief conversation mixes the practical language of commerce with the human need for connection. The bronze coins that pass between them are warm from her palm, and they join their metal siblings in Demetrios' worn leather pouch with the soft music that marks another small success in the daily struggle to transform labor into sustenance, hope into reality. The fish seller, Georgios, has claimed a strategic position where the morning breeze carries away the stronger aspects of his trade. His catch is modest, no exotic delicacies here, just the honest saltwater fish that swim in the waters surrounding Constantinople. Sardines packed in coarse salt, their silver scales still catching fragments of light that filtered through his canvas awning. A few larger fish, their eyes cloudy with the passage from sea to market, represent the possibility of genuine abundance for families who usually make do with simpler fare. Watch how Georgios handles his merchandise with the respect accorded to precious objects. Each fish is arranged to show its best qualities, and when a customer makes a selection, he wraps it carefully in clean cloth, as if packaging a gift rather than concluding a routine transaction. There's dignity in this careful attention, a recognition that even the simplest exchange between human beings deserves grace and consideration. The morning progresses with its own gentle logic. More figures emerge from side streets, drawn by the magnetic pull of commerce and community that makes markets the natural gathering places for people who might otherwise remain isolated in their individual struggles. A small girl, perhaps 6 years old, tugs at her mother's dark woolen dress while eyeing Maria's bread with the intense focus that only genuine hunger can inspire. Her mother counts the coins in her palm twice, calculating not just the cost of today's meal, but tomorrow's possibilities as well. The mathematics of poverty requires such precision. Every bronze piece must stretch to cover not just bread, but oil for the lamp, perhaps a small portion of cheese if fortune smiles. Maybe even a copper or two saved against future emergencies that are as inevitable as winter. The sounds here create their own peaceful symphony, soft conversations between seller and buyer. The rustle of canvas in the morning breeze, the distant clip-clop of more carts arriving with their loads of possibility. Occasionally, a child's laugh rises above the murmur, bright and unexpected as a bird's call, reminding everyone present that even in circumstances of economic uncertainty, joy finds its expressions in the resilient creativity of young hearts. As the morning light grows stronger, the pace of activity increases slightly, but never loses its essential character of unhurried humanity. These outer stalls serve customers who work with their hands and must buy carefully. People for whom every purchase represents a significant portion of their resources. The transactions here are conducted with mutual respect born from shared understanding of what it means to live close to the edge of economic survival. A monastery's purchasing. Brother arrives with his list of daily necessities, his brown robe and rope belt marking him as someone who has chosen poverty as a spiritual discipline rather than had it imposed by circumstance. His negotiations with the vendors carry a different quality, gentler, more philosophical, touched by the understanding that in God's eyes, the distinction between buyer and seller, between monk and merchant, matters less than the kindness they show each other in their brief encounter. But as the sun climbs higher and the market begins to fill with a wider variety of customers and goods, what treasures await in the deeper regions where the city's more prosperous citizens conduct their own careful commerce? The answer draws us deeper into the market's maze, where whispers of color and texture beckon like sirens of commerce, toward stalls where the dreams of distant places have been woven into cloth that carries within its threads the stories of half the known world. Here, where morning sunlight filters through canvas awnings like honey through fine gauze, the fabric merchants display their wares with the reverence of priests arranging sacred vestments for the most important ceremony of their lives. Helena the weaver presides over her collection of textiles with the quiet authority of someone who understands that fabric is never merely fabric, but the raw material from which dignity, beauty, and protection against both weather and social judgment are constructed. Her fingers, permanently stained with dyes and roughened by years of wrestling thread into submission, move across her goods with the gentle precision of a mother, checking her sleeping children. Each piece spread across her wooden tables tells a story she knows by heart. Silk that traveled the length of Asia in caravans that moved like slow rivers across deserts and mountains, wool that grew on sheep grazing in Anatolian meadows where shepherds still sang songs their grandfathers learned, linen that began its journey as flax growing beside the Nile in fields that remembered pharaohs and pyramids. The very air here seems thick with geography, with the compressed essence of distances that most people will never travel, but can touch through the medium of woven threads. Colors possess their own strange magic in this era before chemical dyes. Deep burgundy wool that catches light like wine in a golden goblet, emerald green silk that seems to move with its own inner life, a golden thread that might have been spun from captured sunbeams by craftspeople who understood that luxury must be earned through patience and skill rather than manufactured through industrial processes. These hues carried the complexity that comes only from natural sources, crushed insects for the deepest reds, powdered minerals for blues that shift and change with the viewing angle, plant extracts that required months of careful preparation to yield their chromatic secrets. Run your fingers, in imagination, across the texture of Byzantine wool, and feel how it differs from anything our modern world produces. Coarser, certainly, carrying the honest roughness of sheep and weather in hands that knew no synthetic fibers, but also dense and warm, woven tight enough to turn away winter's most determined assault. The silk whispers against imaginary skin like water made solid, like touch transformed into pure sensation. Each thread representing not just craftsmanship, but the dangerous journeys of merchants who risked everything to bring these precious materials to Constantinople's hungry markets. Beside Helena, yon Nikephoros tends his collection of threads and yarns, with the focused intensity of a scholar organizing rare manuscripts. Spools of silk in shades from cream to deep purple are arranged in careful gradations that please the eye. While hanks of wool hang from wooden pegs like rainbow, fragments that have learned to hold still long enough to be purchased and transformed into garments that will warm bodies through another harsh Constantinople winter. His is the more democratic, trade selling to the home weavers who create their families, clothing thread by thread, evening by evening, in the lamplit, hours after the day's other work is complete. These women, invisible to history, but essential to their family's survival, will take these materials home and transform them through patient labor into the clothes that make the difference between respectability and shame. Between warmth and suffering, a customer approaches Helena's stall. A woman whose bearing and dress suggest the household of a successful merchant or miner. She examines a length of blue wool with the concentrated attention of someone for whom this purchase represents weeks of saved coins. Months of careful household management. Her fingers test the fabric's weight and weave while she conducts negotiations that encompass not just price but story where this cloth originated, how it was made, whether it will hold its color through the washings and wear. That are the inevitable fate of all textiles. In a world where nothing can be discarded lightly, the conversation unfolds in Greek, peppered with the technical vocabulary that every woman of her class must master. Words for different weaves, for grades of wool quality, for the subtle variations in silk that separate the truly precious from the merely expensive. But beneath the commercial discussion runs a deeper current. The shared understanding between women who know that fabric represents far more than mere covering, that it is the medium through which social identity is constructed and maintained, through which families signal their status and aspirations to a world that judges quickly and forgives slowly. Children dart between the stalls, like schools of fish, their bare feet silent on the packed earth, their eyes wide at the transformation of ordinary market space into something approaching wonderland through the magic of color and texture. One small boy pauses to stroke a length of green silk with the expression of someone encountering pure beauty for the first time in his young life. Helena notices and smiles, not shooing him away but allowing him this moment of aesthetic education before he returns to whatever harsh realities shape his daily existence. The scents here are subtle but complex, the lanolin that clings to wool even after processing, the faint sweetness that seems to emanate from silk, the earthy smell of plant dyes, and underneath it all, the patient odor of human labor that no amount of washing can entirely eliminate. These fabrics carry within their fibers the sweat of weavers working by lamplight, the dust of long journeys from production centers to market, the smoke of the fires that heated dye, vats and workshops scattered across the empire and beyond. As the morning warms and more customers arrive, The fabric stalls become theaters where small dramas of desire and limitation play out against backdrops of extraordinary beauty. Servants sent by wealthy households to purchase cloth for new garments, they will sew but never wear themselves. Mothers calculating whether they can afford the good wool for winter cloaks that must last their children through several seasons of growth. Young men fingering silk with the distant look of those who dream of someday being prosperous enough to give such gifts to wives they haven't yet met. But perhaps most remarkable is the dignity with which these merchants conduct their trade. There's no desperation here, no frantic hawking of goods, no artificial urgency designed to pressure customers into poor decisions. Instead, there's the quiet pride of craftspeople who understand the value of what they offer, who know that in a world where beauty is rare and precious, they serve as custodians of color and texture, keepers of the traditions that transform the necessity of clothing into something approaching art. A young woman approaches Nikaros's thread display, clearly a weaver herself, judging by the way she evaluates his goods. Her conversation with him becomes a masterclass in the technical aspects of their shared craft discussions of thread, weight, and twist, of color, fastness, and durability, of the subtle properties that make some materials suitable for certain applications while rendering them useless for others. This is knowledge that will never appear in any official chronicle. Skills that represent generations of accumulated wisdom about how to transform raw materials into objects of utility and beauty. As we prepare to drift toward other corners of this remarkable marketplace, we carry with us not just the visual memory of these fabrics, their colors and patterns, and the way light played across their surfaces, but an understanding of how beauty persists even in the most practical circumstances. How the human hunger for aesthetic pleasure finds expression even among people whose primary concern must always be survival. But what exotic aromas and precious substances await in the corner where merchants deal in goods so valuable they're measured not by the handful but by the individual grain? The answer drifts toward us on wisps of cinnamon and cardamom that dance through the market air, like invisible ambassadors from the far reaches of the known world, leading us to a corner where the very atmosphere seems thick with stories of dangerous journeys and precious cargo. Here, in a stall that's barely more than a wooden table topped with a weather-stained canvas awning, Andreas the spice merchant presides over treasures that have traveled farther than most people of his era will ever dream of going. Andreas himself embodies the patience required by his trade-weathered hands moving among small clay pots and leather pouches with the precise care of an alchemist preparing philosopher's gold. His beard, once black as pepper, now bears the silver of 40 years, spent in the company of exotic scents and the delicate mathematics of profit margins measured in individual grains. Each morning, he arranges his modest inventory with ritual precision, understanding that in the spice trade, presentation transcends mere commerce to become a form of storytelling, where a few threads of saffron displayed just so can transport customers to hillsides they'll never see, to harvests they'll never participate in. The saffron itself glows like captured sunlight in its small ceramic bowl, each crimson thread worth more than silver, each pinch representing the careful labor of women who rose before dawn to harvest crocus flowers. While dew still held their precious cargo, these delicate stigmas traveled from the mountains of Cilicia in carefully guarded caravans, protected like the treasure they truly are. Each thread a small miracle of flavor and color that can transform simple rice into something approaching magnificence, ordinary bread into a feast worthy of celebration. Andreas sells them with the gravity accorded to sacred objects, measuring out tiny portions to customers who understand that they're purchasing more than seasoning, they're buying transformation itself. The power to elevate humble ingredients into experiences that linger in memory long after the last bite is consumed. The transaction becomes ritual, customer and merchant, both understanding that they're participating in something that connects Constantinople's kitchens to Persian gardens, Byzantine tables to the ancient traditions of flavor that make mere eating into an art form. Beside the saffron, black peppercorns rest in worn leather pouches, their wrinkled surfaces holding The heat of Malabar hillsides and the salt spray of Indian Ocean voyages that took months to complete and claimed the lives of merchants brave enough or desperate enough to risk. Everything for the promise of profit. In Constantinople, pepper is literally worth its weight in silver so precious that dowries are sometimes paid in peppercorns. Wealthy families guard small hoards like other people protect gold. And theft of spices carries penalties, severe enough to deter all but the most desperate criminals. Andreas measures pepper with brass scales that belonged to his father. Inherited along with the knowledge of how to judge quality, how to detect adulteration, how to build the relationships of trust that allow the spice trade to function across vast distances and cultural differences. Each transaction is a small ceremony of mutual respect, customer trusting merchant's expertise. Merchant trusting customers' coins, both participating in an economic dance that connects them to networks of exchange stretching from Constantinople to the edges of the known world. The cinnamon bark curls like ancient scrolls, whispering of Ceylon forests and the dangerous sea routes that brought these aromatic treasures to Byzantine markets through a chain of intermediaries, each adding their own small profit to the final price, but also their own essential service to the complex logistics that make international trade possible. Run imaginary fingers along the rough surfaces of these bark strips, and you can almost feel the distant sunshine that warmed the trees they came from, the tropical rains that nourished their growth, the hands that harvested and prepared them for their long journey to this modest stall in a forgotten market. The wine merchant, Stephanos, oversees earthenware jugs and amphorae that contain liquid memories of vineyards, scattered across the empire's far-flung territories. This is not the refined vintage that graces imperial banquets, but honest, everyday wine that makes hard bread more palatable and difficult days more bearable. That transforms simple meals into modest celebrations and solitary dinners into occasions for quiet contemplation. He offers small tastes to serious customers, watching their faces as they evaluate the balance of sweetness and acidity. The hint of herbs from hillside vineyards where grapevines grow among wild thyme and rosemary. The warmth that will spread through tired bodies at the end of long days spent in physical labor. Each sip represents not just quality assessment, but cultural transmission, the sharing of knowledge about how wine should taste, how pleasure can be found even in circumstances of economic limitation. The morning progresses with gentle rhythm that seems almost musical in its regularity. Customers pause to exchange news and gossip while making their selections, turning each purchase into a small social event that helps weave the community fabric tighter against the forces that constantly threaten to isolate people within their individual struggles. The blacksmith's wife sharing word of her daughter's betrothal while buying dates for the celebration feast. The monastery's purchasing agent discussing the spiritual benefits of fasting while selecting the modest provisions that will sustain his brothers through their holy disciplines. Children dart between the stalls like schools of colorful fish, their bare feet silent on the worn stones, occasionally earning small tastes from vendors who remember their own hungry childhoods and understand that kindness, like bread, is meant to be shared rather than hoarded. The fortunate ones clutch bronze coins warm from their mother's hands, making their first independent purchases with the gravity of diplomats negotiating international treaties. Learning through practice the complex social skills that make commerce possible. The conversations here flow like wine from generous pitchers, discussions of family news and weather patterns, of grain prices and the quality of this year's olive harvest, of small hopes and large worries that make up the texture of ordinary life in extraordinary times. These food stalls serve as informal gathering places where the community's social fabric is woven and rewoven through daily interactions, where isolation is temporarily dissolved in the shared rituals of choosing, purchasing, and consuming the basic elements that make survival not just possible, but occasionally pleasant. As the sun reaches its peak and heat begins to intensify all the aromas, creating a sensory symphony that speaks directly to the most primitive parts of human experience: the need for nourishment, the desire for pleasure, the social bonds that form around shared meals and common appreciation for the earth's bounty. we begin to understand why food markets occupy such central positions in human settlements throughout history, but what intellectual nourishment and written wisdom circulate in the quieter corners where merchants deal in humanity's most precious and fragile commodity, knowledge itself. The answer whispers to us from a quieter corner of the market, where the sounds of commerce fade to gentle murmurs and the very air seems thick with contemplation, drawing us toward the realm of those who traffic in humanity's most precious and perishable treasure, the written word. Here, beneath canvas awnings that filter sunlight into the golden hues favored by illuminated manuscripts, scribes and book merchants conduct their patient trade in knowledge, memory, and the captured thoughts of minds both living and centuries departed. Brother Maximos, a monk from the renowned Studios monastery, sits cross-legged on a worn carpet that has absorbed decades of scholarly meditation. His writing desk, a simple board laid across his knees with the humble efficiency that characterizes monastic life. His fingers, permanently stained with the brown-black of iron gall ink, move across parchment with careful precision that comes from understanding that each letter is simultaneously a sacred trust and a vital link in the chain connecting past wisdom to future understanding. The manuscript he copies today is a collection of saints' lives, not the elaborate volumes destined for cathedral libraries, but a modest compilation intended for a neighborhood church, where ordinary people will hear these stories read aloud on feast days, where the adventures of holy men and women will provide both spiritual instruction and entertainment for congregations that include many who cannot read but who hunger for the narratives that give meaning to their daily struggles. The parchment itself tells stories that Brother Maximos reads with hands as much as eyes. This particular sheet was once the skin of a sheep that grazed in Anatolian meadows, carefully prepared by craftsmen who understood that the preservation of knowledge requires materials capable of outlasting the mortals who create and consume written works. The surface has been scraped smooth and polished with pumice until it gleams like cream, ready to receive the dark kiss of ink and transform into something that will carry human thoughts across centuries with greater reliability than human memory ever could. His writing implements are simple but precisely crafted. Quill pens cut from goose feathers, each one shaped to produce the specific line width required for different scripts and purposes. Reed pens for the bold strokes of titles and initial letters that catch the eye and signal importance. A sharp knife for sharpening quills and scraping away mistakes before they can contaminate the final product. A ruler for keeping lines straight and margins consistent. And most precious of all, the ink itself, complex mixture of iron, crushed gall nuts, and wine that will darken with age, becoming more permanent with time. As if the passage of years strengthens rather than weakens the bonds between thought and page. Nearby, the book merchant Kalanikos displays his modest inventory on a table covered with felt to protect precious volumes from scratches and environmental damage. These are not the elaborate codices commissioned by wealthy patrons for their private libraries, but the working books that serve Constantinople's literate minority, psalters for private devotion, herbals for physicians and apothecaries who must distinguish between healing plants and their poisonous cousins, practical guides for craftsmen seeking to improve their techniques, and the occasional classical text that has survived the centuries through the patient work of copyists like Brother Maximos. A customer approaches a young physician whose medical practice serves the middle class, merchants, and their families. People prosperous enough to afford professional treatment but not wealthy enough to maintain personal physicians. He examines a herbal manuscript with concentrated attention of someone whose livelihood depends on accurate information, whose patients' lives may hang on the difference between correct and incorrect identification of medicinal plants and their properties. The manuscript contains descriptions of healing herbs, their seasonal characteristics, and the preparations used to treat various ailments that plague urban populations. Each recipe represents generations of accumulated knowledge, passed down through careful copying of texts like this one, preserved against the entropy that claims most human knowledge within a few generations of its creation. The physician tests the accuracy of the text by comparing it to his own hard-won experience. While Kallinikos vouches for the reliability of the scribe who created this particular copy, the negotiation that follows is conducted in hushed tones appropriate to transactions involving sacred commodities. The physician must balance the cost of the manuscript against its potential value in his practice, while Kallinikos must price his goods to reflect not just the cost of materials and labor, but the intrinsic value of knowledge itself, information that might someday mean the difference between life and death, between healing and prolonged suffering, between professional success and failure. Children occasionally pause at the scribe's corner, drawn by the mysterious process of transforming invisible thoughts into visible marks, of creating objects that can speak across time and distance to people who will never meet their creators. Brother Maximos sometimes allows them to watch as he forms letters with careful strokes, explaining in simple terms how each symbol represents a sound, how sounds combine into words, how words preserve the thoughts of people they will never meet, including thoughts of people who died centuries before they were born. The morning light shifts and changes as it filters through canvas awnings, creating an environment that seems specifically designed for contemplation and detailed work. The scribes adjust their positions to follow the best illumination, understanding that their craft depends not just on skill and knowledge, but on the ability to see clearly the intricate details that distinguish one letter from another, one word from its similar neighbors, one meaning from potentially catastrophic misinterpretation. The conversations here carry different qualities from those at other market stalls, quieter, more philosophical, colored by understanding that books are not mere objects but repositories of human consciousness, vessels containing the accumulated wisdom and folly of generations. A monastery librarian discussing the difficulties of obtaining accurate copies of patristic texts that preserve the theological insights of the early church fathers. A wealthy merchant steward inquiring about books suitable for his master's private collection. Volumes that will demonstrate both learning and social status too. Important visitors, the tools of literacy, surround these conversations like silent witnesses too. Humanity's long struggle against ignorance and forgetting. Bottles of different colored inks for decorated initials that transform functional text into artistic achievement. Sheets of precious vellum waiting to receive important works. Binding materials that will protect finished manuscripts from the ravages of time, and use in the inevitable accidents that claim most written works within a few generations of their creation. Each item in this scholarly corner represents a small investment in the future, a bet that human knowledge is worth preserving despite the enormous costs in time and materials, that future readers will thank present copyists for their patient labor, that civilization depends as much on the preservation of past wisdom as on the creation of new knowledge through direct experience and experimentation. As the day progresses, the work continues with monastic persistence. Letters form into words with careful deliberation. Words accumulate into sentences that capture complex thoughts. Sentences build into paragraphs that will outlive their creators and serve readers not yet born. The scratching of quill on parchment provides gentle counterpoint to the market's busier sounds. A reminder that even in a world focused on immediate survival, some people dedicate their lives to preserving accumulated wisdom for the uncertain use of posterity. But perhaps most moving is the understanding that most of these carefully copied texts will not survive the centuries that separate their creation from our modern world. Fire, flood, war, and simple neglect will claim the majority of these patient labors, leaving only random fragments to suggest the vast libraries of knowledge that once existed. The scribes work knowing this, understanding that their contribution to human memory is both essential and ephemeral, that each copied text represents simultaneously an act of faith in the future and an acknowledgement of mortality that touches all human endeavors. But what forgotten lives and humble crafts persist in the market's shadowed alleys, where history's spotlight never penetrated, but where the empire's foundation was built through countless small acts of skill and service? Beyond the established thoroughfares, where recognized merchants display their respectable wares, the market sprawls into narrow alleys and forgotten corners where a different kind of commerce unfolds quieter, more desperate. Touched with the melancholy of lives lived perpetually on society's margins, yet essential to the functioning of the complex organism that keeps Constantinople's million inhabitants fed, clothed, and supplied with the 1,000 necessities that make urban life possible. Here, in passages barely wide enough for two people to pass without brushing shoulders, where shadows linger even at midday and the sun's warmth penetrates only in brief, precious intervals, we encounter the people whom history's chroniclers rarely bother to notice yet, who form the invisible foundation upon which the empire's grander pretensions ultimately rested in a passage that smells of leather and human sweat. Sergios the cobbler sits hunched over his last, his gnarled hands working with the patient skill that comes from 30 years of coaxing worn footwear back into functional condition. His stall is nothing more than a wooden stool and a few boards balanced between two stone blocks. But from this humble setup flows a steady stream of repaired shoes, mended straps, and resoled boots that will carry Constantinople's working people through another season of survival on streets that show no mercy to inadequate footwear. The shoes that come too? Sergios tell stories their owners rarely speak aloud. Narratives written in worn leather and broken stitching that speak more eloquently than words about the daily struggles of people who live by the labor of their bodies. Work boots worn thin by long days loading and unloading ships at the harbor, their soles shaped by the peculiar gait that develops from carrying heavy loads across uneven surfaces. Women's slippers stretched and patched to accommodate feet swollen by years of standing at market stalls, of walking long distances to save the few coins that cart transportation would cost. Children's shoes pass through his hands with particular frequencies, mall boots that must be constantly enlarged and reinforced to serve their succession of young owners. Families passing footwear down through siblings with the careful attention that more prosperous households might reserve for precious heirlooms. Each repair represents not just craftsmanship but the economics of necessity, serving people for whom buying new shoes is impossible, making the cobbler's skills essential to their mobility and the dignity that comes from being properly shod in a world that judges quickly and harshly. His tools are simple but effective. A curved knife for cutting leather with precision that comes only from decades of practice. Awls for punching holes exactly where they're needed. Thread waxed to resist moisture and the constant stress of walking. And the last itself a foot-shaped form worn smooth by countless fittings and adjustments, shaped by use into something that knows the common architecture of human feet better than any formal study could reveal. The leather he works with often comes from salvaged sources, scraps and offcuts that would be discarded in more prosperous circumstances, but which Sergius transforms into functional protection for feet that must navigate Constantinople's harsh streets day after day. His practiced eye can assess a piece of leather's potential with a glance, understanding how different cuts and treatments will serve different purposes, how repairs can be made to last not just weeks but seasons. Nearby, Maria the potter tends a small display of clay vessels that speak to the most basic human needs with elegant simplicity. Water jugs designed to carry precious liquid from public fountains to private homes, where every drop must be conserved and carefully used. Cooking pots shaped by hands that understand the relationship between form and function. Vessels that will transform raw ingredients into nourishing meals over fires that burn wood too precious to waste on purely aesthetic considerations. Oil lamps occupy places of honor in her modest displays, but essential objects that push back the darkness, falling so completely in ages before electric illumination. Each lamp represents hours of careful shaping, firing, and finishing, but also the promise of light that will extend productive hours beyond daylight's natural boundaries, allowing families to continue their necessary work of mending, preparing food, maintaining the tools and equipment that make their livelihoods possible. The clay itself came from deposits, outside the city walls, dug by men whose names were never recorded, but whose labor provided the raw material for objects that touch every aspect of daily life. Maria's wheel is turned by her own foot, her hands shaping clay with unconscious grace that comes from performing these motions thousands of times, creating vessels that will hold water, wine, oil, grain, the liquid, and granular foundations. So survival in an urban environment where nothing can be taken for granted. A customer approaches with a cracked water jug, its break threatening to render it useless for its essential purpose. Maria examines the damage with focused attention of a physician diagnosing illness, explaining in practical terms how the repair can be made, what it will cost, how long the mended vessel might be expected to serve before requiring replacement. The negotiation is brief and honest, both women understanding that this is not about commerce in any abstract sense, but about salvaging something essential from the constant entropy that threatens all possessions in a world where replacement is often impossible. In the deepest shadows of the alley, where sunlight penetrates only at noon and then only briefly, we encounter the most marginal figures in the market's complex ecosystem. An old man sits beside a carefully sorted pile of rags and bones, examining refuse that others have discarded, searching for anything that might retain residual value in an economy where nothing can be wasted, where even waste finds its uses and purposes. Metal fragments that can be resold to smiths for melting down and reuse. Bones that can be ground for fertilizer or processed into glue. Cloth scraps that might serve pecan-men purposes for families, whose clothing must last far longer than its original makers ever intended. His presence serves as a reminder that in an economy operating close to subsistence level, even the concept of worthlessness becomes relative. That one person's refuse might represent another person's opportunity for survival. A woman with the gaunt face that speaks of chronic hunger, but the upright posture that testifies to persistent dignity offers services rather than goods mending. Cleaning, carrying, the kind of temporary labor that fills gaps in the market's more regular rhythms. Her clothes are patched and repatched but clean, speaking to pride that persists despite circumstances that would break less resilient spirits. She negotiates each small job with dignity of someone who understands that all honest work has value, regardless of its status in society's elaborate hierarchies of respectability. Children move through these shadows like ghosts, some playing games improvised from stones and scraps of wood, others already working running messages between merchants, carrying water to craftsmen whose work cannot be interrupted, helping with countless small tasks that keep the market functioning smoothly. Their laughter, when it comes, seems especially precious in this environment, where joy must be crafted from the smallest materials and most temporary circumstances, where pleasure is a luxury that must be created through imagination rather than purchased with coins. The sounds here differ markedly from those in the market's brighter thoroughfares, more subdued, more careful, touched with the wariness that comes from understanding that tomorrow's survival is never guaranteed. That setbacks, which might be minor inconveniences for more prosperous people, can represent genuine disasters for those living at the margins. Conversations are conducted in lower tones. Bargaining carries more desperate undertones, and the clink of coins changing hands is softer, involving smaller amounts that nonetheless represent enormous proportions of their owners' total resources. But perhaps most remarkable is the sense of community that persists even in these marginal spaces. The networks of mutual aid that allow people with almost nothing to occasionally help those who have even less. The cobbler, sharing his midday bread with the rag picker, who sorted through, refused to find the metal scraps that Sergio's will use to repair shoe buckles. The potter offering a cracked cup to a thirsty child whose mother cannot afford even the smallest purchase. The subtle systems of reciprocity that create safety nets for people whom official charity never reaches. Yet even in these forgotten corners, what distant voices and exotic goods remind us that Constantinople remains the crossroads where three continents meet and cultures blend? As we drift toward the market's more cosmopolitan quarter, the very air seems to thicken with languages and accents that carry within their syllables the dust of distant roads and the salt spray of foreign seas, leading us to where Constantinople's position as the crossroads of three continents becomes most tangible and immediate. Here, merchants from the far reaches of the known world conduct their careful negotiations in a mixture of tongues, gestures, and the universal language of commerce that transcends national boundaries, religious differences, and the political tensions that periodically flare between empires. Ahmed ibn Rashid, an Arab trader from the bustling ports of Syria, has arranged his modest selection of goods with the meticulous care of someone who understands that presentation can mean the difference between profit and loss when selling to customers unfamiliar with your merchandise and skeptical of your foreign origins. His silks bear the subtle patterns favored in Damascus's workshops, geometric designs that tell stories in visual languages that most Byzantines cannot read, but somehow understand through their mathematical elegance and sophisticated interplay of color and form. The very presence of Ahmed in merchants like him represents something remarkable in this age of frequent conflict between Christian and Muslim empires: the persistence of trade, relationships that transcend religious and political boundaries, the recognition that mutual prosperity serves everyone's interests better than the isolation that political leaders sometimes advocate. The same roots that carry armies and diplomatic missions also bear merchants like Ahmed, men who navigate not just geographical distances, but cultural chasms, serving as informal ambassadors of understanding in a world often dominated by suspicion and hostility. The negotiations between Ahmed and his Byzantine customers unfold with the patient complexity of diplomatic protocols, each transaction requiring creative solutions to overcome barriers of language, custom, and mutual unfamiliarity. Arabic phrases mix with Greek responses, supplemented by Latin terms that serve as neutral ground between competing linguistic traditions. When words fail, gestures take over, pointing, measuring with spread fingers, sketching numbers in the dust with sticks that become temporary writing implements. Ahmed demonstrates the quality of his silk by holding it up to catch the morning light, letting the fabric's natural beauty speak more eloquently than any verbal description could manage. His customers examine the weave with experienced fingers, testing weight and texture, while he explains through translators and interpreters the techniques used in its creation. The regional variations that make Syrian silk distinctive, the proper care that will preserve its appearance through years of use beside him. Vargas, the Armenian merchant, displays the products of his mountain homeland with quiet pride that needs no translation. Armenian craftsmanship was already legendary throughout the Byzantine world: metalwork that combined strength with beauty, textiles that bore patterns passed down through generations of highland weavers, jewelry that captured the sophisticated artistic traditions of a people who had survived centuries of conquest and displacement through the excellence of their crafts and the loyalty of their extended family networks. Vargas speaks Greek with the accent of someone who learned it as a necessity for survival rather than a birthright, but his fluency with his merchandise requires no linguistic mediation. When he shows a potential customer the intricate chainmail produced in Armenian workshops, his hands move with confidence of someone who knows exactly what he's selling. It's why it's worth the silver coins he's requesting. The metal's flexibility, the precision of its interlocking links, the quality of the steel used in its construction, these characteristics speak in the universal language of functional excellence that transcends cultural boundaries. The Italian merchants occupy a strategic corner where their Latin mingles with the emerging vernacular that will someday evolve into modern Italian, their presence representing the growing commercial sophistication of the Western Mediterranean and the gradual shift in trade patterns that will eventually challenge Constantinople's dominance of international commerce. They've traveled dangerous sea routes from Venice and Genoa, their ships loaded with goods that represent innovations in European craftsmanship and changes in Western European taste and purchasing power. Their journey to Constantinople represents triumph over pirates who prey on merchant vessels, storms that can destroy months of investment in minutes. and the countless hazards that make Mediterranean commerce a gamble with fate itself. Each successful voyage demonstrates not just business acumen, but physical courage, navigational skill, and the kind of calculated risk-taking that drives commercial expansion and cultural exchange. Their goods tell stories of an expanding world, where traditional trade routes compete with newer alternatives, where Eastern patterns blend with Western weaving techniques, where metalworking innovations developed in European workshops begin to influence traditional Byzantine craftsmanship. A Venetian merchant displays glass beads that capture light like frozen rainbows, their colors and clarity speaking to technical innovations that are gradually changing the possibilities of decorative art and personal ornamentation the Persian traders bring, with them aromas and textures that speak of an ancient civilization that has adapted to new political realities while maintaining its essential cultural character. Their carpets, even the modest ones suitable for this middle-tier market, bear patterns that encode centuries of aesthetic refinement, each knot representing hours of patient work by weavers who inherited their skills from mothers and grandmothers, stretching back through generations of artistic evolution and cultural transmission. When a Persian merchant unrolls a carpet for inspection, the ritual that follows transcends simple commercial transaction to become something approaching aesthetic education. Potential buyers are invited to feel the texture with their hands, to examine the intricacy of the patterns with their eyes, to appreciate the way colors interact and complement each other in combinations that please the eye even when their symbolic meanings remain mysterious. The merchant explains, through translators when necessary, the significance of different motifs, the regional variations in style and technique, the way certain patterns carry meanings that connect physical objects to larger cultural narratives about beauty, prosperity, and spiritual significance. The morning progresses with a series of small, cultural exchanges disguised as commercial transactions. A Byzantine merchant's wife learning to distinguish between different grades of Arab silk through touch and visual examination. An Italian trader discovering the superior metallurgy of Armenian smiths and negotiating for samples can take back to European craftsmen for study and potential imitation. A Persian merchant sharing tea with his Byzantine customers according to traditions of hospitality that create temporary bridges across the chasms of language and custom that usually separate people from different cultural backgrounds. Children move through this international quarter with eyes wide at lessons in human diversity that no formal education could provide as effectively as direct observation. They hear languages they cannot understand, but somehow recognize as human communication expressing familiar emotions and needs. They see goods that expand their conception of what's possible in craftsmanship and beauty, that suggest worlds beyond their immediate experience, where different solutions have been developed for universal human problems. The sounds here create their own unique symphony. Arabic phrases mixing with Armenian exclamations. Italian negotiations punctuated by Greek responses. Persian poetry quoted to illustrate the cultural significance of decorative patterns that carry meanings, invisible to foreign eyes, but essential to proper appreciation of the craftsman's intentions. Occasionally, a merchant will break into sanga, a fragment of melody from his homeland that somehow communicates more than words, about the emotional landscape of exile and an adventure that defines the traveling trader's life. But as the day advances and the foreign merchants prepare for afternoon rest, what transformation awaits this bustling marketplace as shadows lengthen and the rhythms of commerce gradually give way to evening's quieter contemplation? The sun has begun its gentle descent toward the horizon, painting Constantinople's ancient walls with warm honey-gold light that transforms even the humblest market stalls into something approaching magic. This is the hour when day's commercial urgency gradually dissolves into evening's more contemplative rhythms, when the market's earlier energy transforms into something quieter, more reflective, touched with the melancholy that comes when any meaningful activity draws toward its inevitable conclusion. Vendors begin their unhurried preparations for night's approach with rituals that speak to centuries of accumulated wisdom about how to preserve goods, secure profits, and prepare for tomorrow's renewal of the eternal cycle of buying and selling. Hoping and calculating, succeeding and surviving. Canvas awnings are adjusted to catch the last productive light while protecting merchandise from dew that will begin forming as temperatures drop. Goods are carefully sorted the days, sales separated from tomorrow's possibilities, damaged items set aside for repair or discount pricing. Coins are counted with quiet satisfaction of those who have earned another day's survival, or the resigned acceptance of those for whom today's efforts fell short of necessity's demands. But even disappointment carries a certain peace at this hour, softened by understanding that tomorrow will bring new opportunities, new chances to transform hope into sustenance, dreams into the modest realities that make life bearable for people who expect neither luxury nor ease, but only a chance to continue the daily struggle with dignity intact. Maria, the bread seller, stacks her remaining loaves in wooden baskets lined with clean cloth that will protect them from dust and moisture through the night hours. The bread that remains speaks to the delicate calculations of daily commerce. Too little baked means missed opportunities and disappointed customers. Too much means waste that a family surviving on narrow margins cannot afford to absorb. But Maria has learned through years of experience to read the market's moods, to gauge the appetites of her regular customers, to balance optimism with practicality in ways that keep her family fed and her small business operational. The transition toward evening brings different types of customers. To the market people whose own work keeps them busy during daylight hours and who can only shop when their labor is finished. Servants from wealthy households completing their daily procurement of provisions for elaborate kitchens they will work in but never eat from. Craftsmen whose own shops close with the failing light, now searching for the materials and food that will sustain them through another night and prepare them for tomorrow's labors. Night workers begin appearing, making preparations for occupations that unfold in darkness. The bakers, who will work through the night to provide tomorrow's bread, their ovens glowing like beacons in the sleeping city. The guards who will patrol streets and walls while Constantinople dreams, carrying torches that create moving pools of safety in an urban landscape that becomes dangerous when honest people retreat indoors. The fishermen who will row out into the Bosphorus before dawn, their nets ready to harvest the sea's bounty while most citizens sleep. The conversations at this hour carry different rhythms and concerns from those of the busy morning hours. There's less urgency in the negotiations, more time for the social exchanges that transform purely commercial relationships into the community bonds that help people survive in circumstances where individual effort alone might not be sufficient. The spice merchant shares news of his daughter's betrothal with customers who have become familiar faces over years of small transactions. The fabric seller discusses the quality of this. Years will harvest with women who understand such matters because their family's warmth depends on making wise choices about winter. Clothing. Children play in the spaces between stalls, their games adapted to the commercial environment that forms their primary playground and educational space. They build miniature markets with stones and sticks, mimicking the adult behaviors they observe daily, learning through play the complex social and economic relationships that will shape their own futures when they inherit their parents' roles in this ancient dance of survival and community. Their laughter provides gentle counterpoint to the more serious discussions of their elders, a reminder that even in circumstances of economic uncertainty, joy finds its expressions in the resilient creativity of young minds discovering the world. The foreign merchants begin securing their goods for the night, many preparing to retire to the caravanserai and modest inns that serve Constantinople's international trading community with varying degrees of comfort and security. Their departure marks one of the day's significant transitions, the moment when the market becomes purely local again, when the exotic elements that speak of distant places and different ways of organizing life give way to the more familiar rhythms of neighborhood commerce and long-established community interaction. But the local merchants remain, conducting the final transactions of the day with customers who represent the market's most intimate relationships, built over years of mutual dependence and gradual trust. The cobbler accepting shoes that will be repaired overnight and ready for collection at tomorrow's dawn. His skilled hands already assessing what work will be required. The potter selling oil lamps to families who need light for evening activities, cooking the day's final meal. Mending clothes and tools. Engaging in the dozen small tasks that extend productivity beyond daylight's natural boundaries. As shadows lengthen and the quality of light begins its subtle transformation, the market's visual character changes dramatically. The harsh clarity of midday sun gives way to softer, more forgiving illumination that makes even humble goods appear touched with beauty.
Tact.
That emphasizes the human connections underlying all commercial activity. Bronze coins catch golden glints as they change hands in final transactions. Fabric colors deepen and warm in the slanted light that reveals textures invisible at other hours. The faces of merchants and customers alike seem softened, made more human by illumination that emphasizes character lines, while hiding the harsher marks left by poverty and hard labor. The sounds change too, becoming more intimate and less urgent as crowds thin, and conversations can be conducted in normal tones rather than the raised voices necessary to compete with midday bustle. The gentle evening breeze carries sounds farther, so that a child's laugh playing in one corner of the market mingles with farewell greetings of merchants in another, creating an acoustic tapestry that speaks to the market's fundamental character as a space where human connection flourishes alongside commercial activity. Some vendors begin the process of closing their stalls, but it's done without haste, with understanding that the end of commercial activity doesn't mean the end of social interaction. Neighbors help each other secure canvas coverings and move valuable goods to safer overnight storage. The community aspects of market life become more visible as purely commercial elements recede, revealing the networks of mutual aid and social obligation that help people survive in circumstances where individual effort alone might prove insufficient for meeting life's challenges. But as night settles over Constantinople and the market prepares for sleep, what echoes will remain of this forgotten world where ordinary people lived extraordinary lives that history never bothered to record? Night settles over Constantinople like a gentle benediction, bringing with it the profound quiet that comes only when a day's honest work is finally complete, and the ancient city prepares for the restorative darkness that will allow tomorrow to begin with renewed hope and energy. The market stalls stand empty now, their canvas coverings tied down against evening breezes, their treasures secured until tomorrow's sun brings another cycle of possibility and transaction, of human need meeting human ingenuity, in the eternal dance that keeps civilization functioning. But as we take this final stroll through passages now illuminated only by scattered oil lamps and the silver wash of moonlight on stones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, we carry with us something more precious than any goods that changed hands today. We carry the memory of lives lived fully within their humble circumstances, of dignity maintained despite economic uncertainty, of beauty discovered in the most ordinary transactions between human beings who shared little except their common humanity and their determination to find meaning in the daily struggle for survival. The echoes we hear now are not just the fading sounds of departed voices, but the resonance of an entire way of life that once pulsed with quiet vitality in these narrow passages. The morning conversations between Maria and her bread customers, discussions about weather and grain quality that transformed routine, commercial exchanges into social rituals that built the invisible bonds holding communities together, the patient explanations of Andreas the spice merchant, sharing knowledge of distant places with children who would never travel beyond their neighborhoods but could journey through their senses to the cardamom forests of India and the saffron fields of distant mountains. In the deeper shadows, where the poorest merchants conducted their desperate but dignified trade. We remember Sergio's the cobbler, whose skilled hands gave extended life to shoes that represented their owner's only protection against harsh realities of stone streets and seasonal weather. His work was never celebrated in imperial chronicles, never recorded in official histories, but it kept people mobile, kept them able to walk to their own work, to the market, to the small daily destinations that made life possible and occasionally pleasant. Every repair made, was a small victory against entropy. A modest triumph of human skill over the forces that constantly threaten to reduce our possessions and, by extension, our possibilities to uselessness. The techniques he used, passed down through generations of craftsmen, represented accumulated wisdom about how to extend the useful life of objects in a world where replacement was often impossible, where making do and mending were essential survival skills. The foreign merchants, who brought with them the scents and textures of distant civilizations, have departed for their lodgings. But they leave behind subtle changes in the market's character that will influence future transactions in ways both obvious and invisible. Techniques observed and adopted by local craftsmen, patterns that will influence the work of Constantinople's weavers and metalworkers, stories that will be retold in workshops and homes, expanding the imaginative horizons of people who will never see the lands these traders described, no, but who now carry mental maps of a larger, more diverse world than they knew at dawn. Even the children who played between the stalls have contributed to the market's enduring legacy, their games incorporating the commercial and social patterns they observed, their laughter providing moments of pure joy that reminded hardworking adults around them that life offers pleasures that can't be bought or sold, but must be created through the alchemy of youth and wonder and the human capacity to find delight in the smallest circumstances. These children learned lessons that no formal education could provide about cooperation and negotiation, about the value of honest work and the importance of treating all people, regardless of their economic status or social position, with basic dignity and respect. They absorbed through direct observation the complex social skills that make commerce possible, the delicate balance between self-interest and community welfare that allows markets to function as spaces of peace rather than conflict. Manuscripts that Brother Maximos copied with such patient care will carry forward the accumulated wisdom of past centuries, but they will also bear the subtle influence of the marketplace where they were created. The social rhythms that shaped his working day, the conversations he overheard, the human dramas that unfolded around his quiet corner. All of these experiences informed his understanding of which kinds of knowledge his community most needed to preserve, which texts deserved the enormous investment of time and materials that copying required. As we walk these empty passages, our footsteps echoing softly against stones polished by countless similar journeys, we understand that we have witnessed something both utterly ordinary and profoundly significant. Ordinary because markets like this one operated throughout the Byzantine Empire, serving similar functions in countless towns and cities whose names survive now only in archaeological reports or not at all. Significant because these humble commercial spaces represented civilization at its most essential. Level places where human beings learn to live together peacefully, to resolve conflicts through negotiation rather than violence, to find common ground across differences of language, religion, and cultural background. The bronze coins that circulated through today's transactions will continue their journeys, carrying with them the warmth of human touch and the accumulated trust that makes commerce possible across barriers of culture and circumstance. Some will eventually make their way into archaeological deposits, where future scholars will study them as artifacts of economic history. But the real history they embody, the stories of individual hope and fear, of careful calculation and generous impulse, of the thousand small decisions that allowed families to survive another day, these stories will vanish as completely as the voices that once negotiated their exchange. The fabrics that were sold will be transformed into garments that will warm bodies through winter's cold, provide dignity for special occasions, and eventually wear out and be recycled into other useful forms according to the ancient rhythms of use and reuse that characterize life in ages when nothing could be wasted. The spices will become meals that nourish both body and spirit, their exotic aromas transforming simple ingredients into celebrations of the earth's abundance and human ingenuity in discovering and preparing the plants that make eating a pleasure rather than merely a necessity. The tools and pottery will serve their functional purposes until they break and are repaired again, and finally replaced by similar objects that will serve similar functions for similar families facing similar challenges with similar courage and resourcefulness. But perhaps most importantly, the social connections forged and renewed in today's market. Activities will persist in ways that extend far beyond the commercial transactions that created them. These forgotten relationships created the mutual aid networks that helped people survive economic difficulties. The accumulated knowledge about who could be trusted with credit and who stood behind their goods with personal integrity. The informal information systems that allowed communities to respond quickly to opportunities and challenges. The cultural bridges that enabled people from different backgrounds to work together, despite their differences. This vanished market, like thousands of others throughout the Byzantine Empire, served as an informal school where people learned the essential skills of civilization, how to live peacefully with strangers, how to resolve disputes through discussion rather than violence, how to build the complex webs of mutual dependence that allow urban life to function smoothly, even when political systems fail or change dramatically. These lessons were never written down, never formally taught, but they were learned through daily practice by millions of ordinary people whose names are forgotten, but whose collective wisdom made possible the survival of their communities through centuries of political upheaval, military invasion, economic crisis, and social transformation. As the last oil lamp gutters and dies, as the final echoes of our imaginary footsteps fade into the profound silence of the sleeping city, we carry with us not just memories of a single day in a single market, but an understanding of how human civilization actually works, through the grand gestures of emperors and armies that fill history books, but through the patient daily efforts of ordinary people to meet their needs, while treating each other with dignity, respect, and the kind of practical kindness that makes survival not just possible, but occasionally beautiful. The market sleeps now, but it will wake tomorrow to another day of small dramas and quiet victories, of hopes fulfilled and disappointments accepted with grace, of the endless human effort to create meaning and beauty within the constraints of economic necessity and social obligation. And in that daily awakening, in that endless renewal of commerce and community, lies perhaps the most profound lesson these forgotten stalls can teach us. That civilization is not an achievement that can be completed and preserved, like a monument, but a practice that must be renewed each day by people who may never be remembered by history, but whose daily choices determine whether the future will be shaped by cooperation or conflict, by hope or despair, by the patient cultivation of human possibility, or by its tragic abandonment. In the end, these echoes of a forgotten market remind us that the most important stories are often the ones that never get told, that the greatest achievements are frequently accomplished by people whose names vanish into the silence of unrecorded time, and that the true measure of any civilization lies not in its monuments or conquests, but in the quality of daily life makes possible for its most ordinary citizens. The Byzantine Empire fell more than 5 centuries ago. Its palaces crumbled, its armies scattered, its emperors reduced to names and dusty chronicles. But the market's lesson endures, whispered by stones that remember the warmth of human hands, carried on breezes that still smell faintly of cardamom and cinnamon, that human beings, given the opportunity and the proper social frameworks, will choose cooperation over conflict, will create beauty within necessity, will find ways to treat each other with dignity, even in the most challenging circumstances. And now, as Constantinople sleeps and dreams of tomorrow's possibilities, as the empty stalls wait patiently for another day's commerce and conversation, we too can rest. We carry with us the peaceful satisfaction of having walked for a few hours in the company of people who understood that the most profound achievements of human civilization are measured, not in gold or territory, but in the simple daily miracle of people helping each other survive, and occasionally even thrive in a world that offers no guarantees except the opportunity to begin again each morning. Sleep well, and dream of markets where kindness was the most valuable currency, where dignity was more precious than gold, and where the echoes of forgotten voices still whisper the ancient human promise that tomorrow, like today, will bring new opportunities for small miracles, quiet victories, and the endless renewal of the simple, essential, magnificent fact of human community persisting through time, carrying us all toward whatever gentle dreams await in the spaces between memory and hope.